Hey, before I get into anything, I think it's obvious, but this video is going to have a lot of opinions, and I know that the internet hates those. But I just wanted to talk about something that I found kind of interesting. If that upsets you, don't watch. It's as simple as that. Just don't watch. Now, into the actual thing. I think something to address with this topic, like, off the bat, I guess, would be, like, the extremist ideas, where, like, manga and anime, like, it's always, like, manga's better, always anime's better. Um, I think, like, my opinion on that boils down to, like, I have experienced both of these, like, like, I have experienced a better manga and a better anime, so I kind of, instantly rule these out in my head. Uh, I would say, like, the manga of Tokyo Ghoul, for example, is just better. I don't think anyone's going to really argue that. But things like, I don't know, like Claymore or Soul Eater, I feel like the manga, for the most part, is worse. The only part where the manga really wins would be the ending. But I don't think I'd recommend a manga just for the ending when, like, the anime has a better experience up until then. So I'd probably give the edge to the anime in those cases. Another thing I would think of is maybe like Tanya, for example, like the Saga of Tanya the Evil. Um, the manga, the representation of gods is very like traditional, it's like a pantheon, like the head of it has like, it's the god with like the bushy white beard, all that. And then, the anime has a very interesting interpretation where, like, God kind of speaks through, people around the main character, and it's kind of, I would say, a little more haunting. Uh, and I'm not saying, like, what happens throughout the entire thing, but I'm just saying, like, early on. This is how they're represented. And I think, like, objectively, the manga is less interesting. Um, but either way, all I'm trying to say is there are examples of each one winning out. But I think like the nuance that I wanted to speak about with this topic that I don't really hear that often is that like I think there's an inherent like difference. Like it's not even like a fair comparison because I mean the amount of like anime that do not have a pre-existing manga prior to their creation, it's not it's not super common, right? So so most anime are going in with like an inherent disadvantage where there's already a successful manga that people are going to compare against this anime. So the reason I think most people think like, oh, manga's better would just be because there's more to go wrong in an anime, so on average you see like, okay, well, not, I wouldn't even say on average, but you see a lot of anime that don't live up to the manga. But I think that's mostly because like the manga going in, I mean, the idea that a manga is successful in and of itself is lucky, I would say. Like even there's plenty of good stories that fall by the wayside, right? So the idea that like all the anime is created from these, I mean that's getting lucky twice. I'm being perfectly honest. Like that's another tier of getting lucky. So it's not like that surprising to me that you would see a lot of anime that are not quite as good as the manga they come from. But I also don't necessarily hold that against the anime because it's just, I would say it's a little bit of a smaller medium in terms of like how many anime there are to the amount of manga that I've seen. So I think it's just it's like an unfair comparison to me. And on top of that, I mean, there's the idea of like how much can go wrong in adapting a manga. Um, I was looking up some like numbers about how many people are actually involved in like an average manga to an average anime. And some of them are like 10 to 1, 20 to 1, 30 to 1. There's a lot more people involved in an anime. And there's that saying, too many cooks in the kitchen, right? So having this many people involved in one work, I think it creates a lot more potential for problems, right? So again, like this makes me think it's a little bit of an unfair comparison, like saying like, oh, the anime or the manga is better. I think it has to be a case by case thing because they're not like they're not a one for one experience. Like I mean, there's a lot more that goes into an anime. The music, the actual smooth animation itself. I mean, the audio. I mean. For example, like Hunter x Hunter for me, like I don't like the anime's dub. because I watched the sub originally, and that to me makes me not want to watch that anime as much. So there's like one little element in that anime, which I would say for the most part is really good, makes, it turns me off of it. It makes me not want to watch it. And, with a manga or something, I mean, if you watch the anime first and go to the manga, you kind of have an idea that this manga is at least relatively decent, because they're not going to adapt it unless it has some success, right? So it's kind of like, not in every case, but in most cases, the manga is the lead up to the anime. So I feel like there's more pressure, there's more to go wrong, there's more people in the kitchen. There's a lot to go wrong with that adaptation. And if one little thing is wrong in an anime, I don't necessarily say it just, the manga's better right after. And that's the Soul Eater effect for me. Where it's like, Soul Eater I don't think is objectively better than, I don't think the manga is objectively better than the anime. I think it's a good ending, but the rest of it I'm not a huge fan of. And I'm not saying, someone can't disagree with that, but I'm saying in my case that to me, and I'm sure everyone has a similar case with this, if they really thought about it and looked at it and read all these different types of manga and whatnot. But that to me shows that, like, it's not like, there's a lot more going into an anime that can go wrong. So I just feel like inherently the idea of, like, anime versus manga is not really, like, a fair comparison. It's something that, like, that's too broad, right? Now you can go case by case, like, oh, compare the anime to the manga for this series, and I think that's, that's fair. They're the same series. But I think when I hear people say, like, anime is always better, manga is always better, it feels very disingenuous to me. Because I don't think it's as simple as that. I think there's a lot more going on with an anime, and I do think sometimes the anime, overshadows the manga. I think sometimes the anime is just inherently better. Like, it just happens, right? Like, sometimes everything goes well, and then boom, you have that. I would even say, like, there are some unique cases where the anime does the story better. One that comes to mind for me is Hellsing. I think the original Hellsing series is probably better than both Hellsing Ultimate and the manga. Most of the manga, not all of it, but that's not necessarily my point. What I'm saying is, like, it's just not something that can be so broadly compared. And I think you see that a lot. Like, someone will just say, like, oh, anime's better, manga's better, blah, blah, blah. But I really don't think it's as simple as that. It's like, it's saying novels are better or something, like, in, just any work of fiction. Like, oh, I like, reading a novel versus reading a comic book. I mean, like, it's just sometimes one is better than the other. It just happens, it's how it's done. So I feel like all I'm trying to get through with this video is just that it's not as simple as I feel like a lot of people make it out to be. And all I wanted to say was just, I don't see that opinion a lot. Like, I don't see people actually, like, thinking about, like, is it fair to compare these things? Like, is it really, like, a reasonable comparison? And I think on the broad, like, in the broader scale of things, I don't really think it is. I don't think, it's like comparing, like, a book to like, all books and then the TV shows and movies that they create. Like, I don't think it's necessarily, like, a one-for-one thing. Sometimes the show's better, sometimes the book's better. Like, it's not something that I think is reasonable to compare the way that is. And sometimes I don't even think, like, that they're in the same, universe. Like, sometimes they're separate entities, and that happens with manga and anime. I guess this was just a little bit of a rant of mine. I just thought it was, like, a interesting little topic, and, I'm going around reading some manga and anime, and, watching some anime and seeing, like, both sides of things, and I've started to really, like, see what the differences are, and it made me really just think, like, it's not something that I think is fair to compare. I think that they're, so different in how they're done, and there's so much going on between each one, and then just how they're made, I feel like inherently makes it a weird comparison. And I think, people always have fun comparing these things, but I don't necessarily think it's a fair comparison. I think it's something that, like, should be a case-by-case basis rather than being so general as it currently is. But yeah, that's just something I want to talk about. I mean, if you have an opinion on this, let me know, I guess. See ya.